It turns out that if the weather is bad, all I want to do is sit on my couch and read. Hi, welcome, come on in. My name is Aoife and today I am wrapping up all of the books that I had put on my autumn TBR. I actually managed to read all 6 of the books that were on my TBR, which is something that I don't think I have done for a TBR this year. We'll start with the book that I read the most recently, and that was All Our Hidden Gifts by Caroline O'Donoghue. This is one of the ones that I was most concerned about going into, mainly for the fact that it is a fantasy book. I'm not a big fantasy reader, I don't read a whole lot of fantasy. It's something that I kind of tend to avoid in bookshops. But I loved this. This wasn't so much of a big fantasy book. There were elements of fantasy to it, but it did take place a whole lot of it in our own world, which I think was a really good grounding factor for me. This book is about Maeve, who is kept behind at school for detention one day, and she is sent to kind of clean up something that the students have called the chokey. It's kind of like a utility closet where volleyballs are kept for PE, or school instruments are kept, or things like that. While she is there, she comes across a pack of tarot cards and she starts to get really into the idea of tarot and of reading. She teams up with Fiona, who is one of the girls in her class, and they have a little kind of a side hustle where Fiona is going to book all of the readings that Maeve is going to do, and Maeve is going to give them out, with a little bit of a cut of the profits going to Fiona. One day, Maeve gives a reading to Lily, who Maeve and Lily used to be best friends up until maybe like a year or two before the book starts, when Maeve had started to fall in with a different crowd who she saw as a little bit more socially popular than Lily was, and had completely abandoned Lily and just brushed her off to the side. During this reading, Maeve says to Lily, "I wish you would just disappear." And the next morning, that's exactly what happens. Lily doesn't turn up to school. She doesn't turn up for 2 days before the police start getting involved. And the whole book revolves around the idea of where Lily has gone to. Why has she gone away? Is there a way that you can bring her back? Also, one of Maeve's friends is Ro, who is Lily's sibling. And I really loved him as a character. I really loved his kind of exploration of his gender identity, of possibly his sexual identity. I think it's something that's going to be discussed a little bit more in the coming books of this series. I also really enjoyed the relationship between Maeve and Ro. I felt like it was very kind of its age group. It's the very kind of throes of young love. It's the throes of first love. And trying to impress your partner and trying to even catch their eye as they're walking down the school corridors towards you. I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. But I do think it was also a really good representation of what it's like when your partner and your best friend are siblings or cousins or related to each other in some way, that you can feel a little bit kind of pulled towards each side in a different situation. I also really loved the relationship between Fiona and her family. Fiona had a Filipino background. I think her mother is Filipina. And I really loved her family's just really big, vibrant energy in this book. There's a whole lot of family gatherings at Fiona's house. There's a lot of her aunts and her uncles who will come over and have dinner and cook together. And I feel like that's very prevalent in Filipino culture, that it's a very big family culture, especially when you're living outside of the Philippines, especially when you're living in a different country where your family is basically your only tie to your home country. I felt like that was a really great thing to see. There is also a kind of a cult aspect to this book, and I really enjoy cults in books. I had a really good time reading about the children of Bridget and the avenues that we were taken down with them, and the kind of ideals that they had, and how they kind of forced themselves and their thinking upon young, impressionable people. I know that that's kind of the modus operandi of a cult, and I felt like it was written so well and it was so engaging and intriguing. I think that the Children of Bridget is going to appear in other books in this series, and I am going to read the other books in this series. I don't think I'm going to buy them for myself. I think it would be one that I would get from my local library, or I'd listen to the audiobook, because I know that Siobhan McSweeney, who is Sister Michael in Derry Girls, does the narration for the audiobooks, which makes sense because these books are set in Cork and Siobhan is from Cork, so you have that kind of local accent in the books as well. But I am really intrigued to see where the other books are going to go. I know that there is a relationship between Maeve and Ro in the next book. I know that we might discover a little bit more about Ro's gender identity or his sexuality. I'm so intrigued to see where this is going to go, and I am genuinely surprised that I liked this as much as I did. Next up is Love at First Sight by Jennifer Dugan. This book was sold to me by Brianna from Four Paws in a Book as chaotic baby bisexuals. And that is exactly what this book is, but I feel like at times it was a little bit too chaotic for me. I enjoyed it and I had a good time reading it, but I think it was just a little bit too much at times. In this book, you are following Lizzie and Cara. Lizzie goes to a wedding with her friend James. They're friends from work. And when she's in the bathroom, she sees another woman kind of standing over a sink and like crying and having a bit of a moment. And Lizzie gives the other woman a bit of a pep talk and listens to relationship woes and ends up saying, hey, I don't think that this is the relationship that you want to be in. I think you deserve to be with somebody better. I think you deserve somebody else. This woman actually turns out to be Cara, who is James's sister and the bride at the wedding that Lizzie was brought to by James. When her whole relationship blows up, Cara actually moves in with James and Lizzie and spends a lot more time with them. And you can see a relationship starting to form between Lizzie and Cara. And I felt like that was a really interesting relationship to see, mainly because we only see it from Lizzie's point of view. I would have really liked to have seen things from Cara's perspective every now and then, to see what she thought of the budding relationship, to see what her feelings about Lizzie were, to see how she felt about maybe exploring her first same-sex relationship. We don't really get a whole lot of an insight as to whether or not she had been with another woman before. I really wish that this was a dual POV book. I feel like it would have worked a whole lot better for me if I had been able to see into Cara's mind as well. I also feel like there was a little bit too much of an interruption from James for both sides. And like in all our hidden gifts, I understand how it can be a little bit difficult when your best friend and your sister are starting to hook up, are starting to have a relationship. But I felt like he was just too intrusive. I felt like he was there a little bit too much of the time. And I really wish that we had just seen the relationship develop by itself. I really wish that we didn't have so much of an input from him. Something that I actually would have liked to have seen more about is Lizzie's relationship with her mother. Lizzie's mother is really going through a tough time. It seems like she has some issues with addiction. She has some issues with depression. She has some issues with alcoholism, with money. And I feel like we got a lot of that at the start of the book. We got a whole lot of like conversations with Lizzie about, I need you to pay this bill. I need you to sort this out with the bailiffs. And it feels like it didn't really go anywhere. It feels like we never really got a resolution to it. It may have happened off page. It may have happened in between something happening here and something happening here. But I really wish that we had gotten to see it happening. I really wish we'd had like a confrontation scene from Lizzie to her mother to say, I can't support you financially or emotionally as much as I have in the past. I just wish that there had been a kind of a big moment there, and it feels like it just fizzled out into nothing. Another mother who I didn't really love in this book was Stella, who was James and Cara's mother. I feel like she was just a caricature villain the whole way through this book. She never really had any redeeming qualities. She never really had anything that was warming or pleasant or comforting about her. And I feel like the whole way through, you were just intended to and supposed to not like reading this woman. You weren't supposed to cheer for her. And it made me question why she still had contact with her two children, why her two children still wanted to take contact with her, when it didn't really seem like they had a great relationship anyway. It seemed like they didn't really get along with one another, like they were always butting heads or clashing. Overall, I did enjoy this book. I half read it and I half listened to the audiobook, and I think I had a better time physically reading it. So if I was to go back and read it again, I think I would physically read the whole thing. Next up is definitely my highlight of this entire TBR, and that is Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I had heard so many great things about this. I had intended to read it in August for the Amazing Readathon, but I didn't actually get around to it because it didn't fit any of the prompts for me. And when I got to it, I was immediately spellbound by it. I completely bought into the hype of this book. This book is about June and Athena. They are both friends, I think, from their college times, and they have kept in touch after college, and both of them have the same career. June and Athena are both writers, but Athena has been much more successful than June has ever been. One night, following a freak accident, Athena actually dies in a choking incident, and June, rummaging around her house and just noticing things lying around, picks up one of Athena's manuscripts that she'd previously been working on and publishes the manuscript as her own work. The issue with this is that Athena was a woman of colour, she was of Asian descent, and June is white. The story that Athena had been writing was about Chinese prisoners of war, was about Chinese people during, I think, World War II. So there is a lot of kind of discussion of June being a white woman, telling stories of people of colour. She even changes her name to June of her song to make it sound a little bit more racially ambiguous. And the book is sold as a bestseller, it is billed as a bestseller, it's given all of the hype and all of the build-up that a bestseller would get in our real world, which makes this book such a fantastic discussion of the idea and the concept of a bestseller. Can they be created? Are they just brought in by the publishers? Or do we, as a reader and as a consumer, have any say in that? As somebody who is very much adjacent to publishing as a book influencer, but isn't working day to day in the lives of publishers, I thought it was such an interesting take on the publishing community. I thought it was such an interesting take on the idea of a book being made into being a bestseller and as manufactured as a bestseller. And again, just the discussion of what the publishing industry is like. It's something that I don't have a whole lot of experience with, but I was so interested in seeing it. I read this book as part of a book club here in Berlin, so I did do a little vlog about that, and there are a couple of more thoughts that I have in that video, which I will link up here in the cards for you if you want to go and check those out. But I was completely blown away by this book. It was my first ever book by Rebecca F. Kwan, because she has done a whole lot of fantasy before this. She's written, I think it's like the Poppy Wars and the Dragon Republic, and those are very heavily fantasy books. Not something that I generally tend to read or reach for, but this was a really great introduction to her books from a contemporary point of view. Next, I read The Love Wager by Lynn Painter. Again, this would have been really great for the Amazing Readathon because it had a yellow cover. And I didn't read it in August, I kept it until September. And I think if I had read it during the Amazing Readathon, it wouldn't have got us a whole lot of points because I struggled through it, I slogged my way through it, and I think it took me over a week to read this one. This book is about Hallie and Jack. They meet each other when Hallie is bartending at a wedding that Jack is attending. It's his sister's wedding, and they hook up that night, but they don't go anywhere after that. They kind of go their separate ways until they meet each other on a dating app. They match each other, they have conversations back and forth, and they just decide to be each other's wing person rather than going out with each other, which I thought was bananas. They seemed to enjoy each other's company. They seemed to really want to hang out with each other. And there was a whole lot of instances of them having such strong feelings for each other, not wanting to tell the other, not wanting to ruin the friendship, and not doing anything about it. So, over the course of the book, they go on these separate dates and they have a little wager between each other that if Hallie finds a date before Jack, she gets his air miles, and if Jack finds a date before Hallie, he gets like a cocktail making course or something like that. The love wager was so important that it had to be named the title of the book, but it was also so unimportant that I forgot for most of the book that it was even happening. There was such little reference to it that when it came up now and then, I was like, oh yeah, we're supposed to be doing something like this. I also feel like it was used a bit too much as a sabotage method towards the end of the book, when Hallie actually did find a partner that she was having a good time with, when actually she was getting along really well with somebody, and Jack was starting to get jealous of her because he wanted to be with her, but of course was doing absolutely zero about that. And Hallie just kept seeing him as kind of sabotaging her relationship so that he could win the bet, rather than so that he could win her over. There were a couple of things also that I didn't like about the writing of this book. It felt very repetitive in strange ways. Within maybe 3 pages, we had been told twice that Olivia, the bride from the start of the book, was Jack's sister. That may have been done for the benefit of people who were reading it as an audiobook, who don't have the opportunity to go back every couple of pages. But for me, who was reading it with my eyes, it felt a little bit too much like, I already know this. You told me this like 10 minutes ago. Why am I reading this again? I don't know if Lynn Painter's writing is something for me. This is definitely not a book that I'm going to keep, and I don't think I'm going to go into any more of her books in the future. But it was fine. It was a book, it exists, and I read it. The next book that I read was The Man Who Died Twice by Richard Osman. This is the second book of the Thursday Murder Club series, and unfortunately, this didn't hit the spot as well as the Thursday Murder Club proper did. I don't quite know what it was about this book. I think it was just a little bit too convoluted. I think it was just a little bit too difficult for me to follow after. Whatever the reason for it was, there just wasn't anything that gripped me in the same way that the first book did. And I know that this is quite a popular opinion. I know that Leandra from TBR to Zero has completely DNF'd this book. I know that Brittany from Brittany Loves Reading. This was the weaker of the 3 books from the series that she had read. My own brother, who I spoke about this with, has also read this book. And he said as well that he felt like this was the weaker of the 3 that he's read. It doesn't mean, however, that I'm going to stop with the series. I am going to keep on going with it. I have just gotten a copy for my family of the third book, The Bullet That Missed, and I'm going to keep going with it, but hopefully it's going to be a bit of an upward spiral. This one follows the 4 people in the Thursday Murder Club. You have got Ibrahim, Joyce, Elizabeth, and Ron. Elizabeth's ex-husband, I've tried to say that 4 times, and this is the way I'm going to keep it in, is in a spot of bother at the moment with MI5. He has been working with espionage, and he is getting caught up in a couple of things. Unfortunately, it's all starting to catch up with him, his past career, and what he is doing at the present, and things take a grisly end for him. There is also the involvement of £20,000 worth of diamonds that have been hidden somewhere in the UK, and it is the task of the Thursday Murder Club to find out where they were. I think that's where it started to become a little bit ridiculous for me, in that the monumental task of finding £20,000 worth of diamonds was given to 4 septuagenarians who were basically just sat in the conservatory of their retirement home playing Cluedo like 6 weeks previously. In this book as well, we are also introduced to the concept of Joyce's Instagram account, which I had heard whispers about. I'd heard things about it, but my friend who I asked it about said, you have to wait until you get to the book to actually find out what it is, because when you get to it, it's phenomenal. And it is phenomenal. It's really cleverly named, but I feel like the excitement of that and the build-up of that, because there was a whole lot of build-up in the publishing community. When this book came out, there was a lot of build-up around Joyce's Instagram account. I feel like it kind of fizzled out in the book. We don't really hear a whole lot about it. It just kind of pops up every now and then. And I really would have loved to seen that explored a little bit more, with like elder people trying to get to terms with technology and like elderly people's use of social media and what that is stereotypically seen as. I think it would have been really great to explore that a little bit more, but it did just kind of go nowhere. Something, however, that I do think was done really well is kind of violence and attacks against elderly people in the community. One of the Thursday Murder Club is unfortunately attacked and mugged just one day while they are out walking. And you can see the fear that this has given them. You can see just how much this has impacted them and shaken them. And I really loved watching everyone else gather around them and rally around them. But again, I feel like that ending of that story was a little bit kind of fizzled out to nowhere. I really would have loved to seen that person brought to justice more so than they have been in this book. They kind of just vanished into thin air, and I really wish something had been done with that. As I said, this wasn't as good for me as the Thursday Murder Club was, but I have heard better things about The Bullet That Missed, so hopefully we're going to go back to a winner with it. Finally, I wanted to get really cozy with my autumn TBR, and I think this book truly did that. This is Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, and I did not expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. Mainly because, as I said, I don't read a lot of fantasy. I don't read a lot of stories about alternate worlds with orcs or with giants or any kind of mythical creatures. But this was so good. This book follows Viv, who is a retired orc and has settled down in the city of Toon looking for a simpler life. And when she is there, she sets up a coffee shop for the people of the community to come and to gather around and to enjoy a drink together. The problem is that nobody in town knows what a coffee is. She has to kind of bring the whole concept and the whole idea of it to the townspeople while setting up this coffee shop in the first place. And that was something that I just loved seeing. This kind of community coming together aspect and discovering new things and finding new flavors, literally finding new flavors. It was so wonderful to see that. I love reading a book in a coffee shop anyway. I love reading books that have cafe settings or restaurant settings. So this was definitely up my street. While Viv is there, she also finds Thimble, who is like a baker in the town, and she finds Tandri, who she hires to work as another barista in the coffee shop, and she explains to them the concept of like a latte. She explains to them what a cappuccino is, or like a long black coffee. And Thimble is a baker who makes these delicious sounding cinnamon rolls or chocolate scrolls. And as I was reading this book, all I wanted to do was run out to my local cafe and order the biggest coffee I could find with a huge slice of cake and just sit there and eat it. It's really atmospheric, it's really warming and really comforting. I'm really excited to read Bookshops and Bone Dust. I have somehow gotten a copy of the NetGalley of it before I even read Legends and Lattes. So I have got the second one that I can just escape into straight away. I think it will be great to read it in November when the nights are really starting to get cold and grey and dreary. So let's see how I enjoy that one too. Those are the books that I had put on my autumn TBR and the books that I actually managed to read off of it. Did you read any of these books, or what was the best book that you read over the autumn? If you'd love to leave me a comment but you can't think of anything you'd like to say, then just leave me the autumnal leaves emoji. Don't forget to like and subscribe because I have new videos up every week. Now, get on out of here.